Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this review, we're looking at the shiny new Electra 88 from UAD. Shiny new seems kind of funny because it's a very dusty old device, or a collection of very dusty old devices, although it looks like someone did dust down the Leslie. Thank you, whoever that was. It's an interesting collection. It's not really an object so much as a collection of objects. What it is the venerable Rhodes Mark II. Now, these are a dime a dozen in software, which we will have a look at. But this one does bring some things which are good. You're going to have to work out whether that's enough to justify for you, but as a package, it's kind of interesting. Obviously, I'm not enough of a pianoist to really make the most of this instrument, which was all over records through the 70s and 80s. It's a surprisingly versatile sound, especially bearing in mind it's a surprisingly, twee sound. Does it sound like a piano? Well, no, not at all. It's more like a vibraphone, but it actually sits in a mix so incredibly well, and is such a versatile and expressive instrument before you even start doing things with and to it, that it has really become such a staple, and you still hear it all over modern tracks. I mean, it was all over Whitney Wu songs, and you still hear it on trap things, invariably nasty samples thereof that have just been mutilated melodically, but nonetheless it is an absolute stayer of an instrument. So you can think of it as being as much a staple of rock as the electric guitar or the drum kit. So it's not surprising that we have many emulations and everybody trying to get in on saying this is a thing you need, because, it is kind of a staple of your average rock song, especially if you're getting into balladry or weepiness or whatever. We will run through some patches. There is a patch thing. Here it is, which makes the display even bigger. I am running at 125% at the moment, just for bigification, for the ease of review. It is fine at 100%, but it is big. There's patches. They've been put into sort of genres and places and stuff. I'm never really sure on that myself, but you've got a lot of things, oddly enough, and I guess it's just to do with alphabeticization. Default is in the middle. I wouldn't mind a default or a perfectly clean, nothing done to it being sort of front and center. This is the default. Alphabetically, they're probably a bit random. Use of drive is surprisingly common and very effective. Dirty bass. That's kind of where you need to be Stevie Wonder. I think this was just weird, this one. Does she know? That lovely, smooth, chimey thing. A lot of later records didn't necessarily use a real Mark II. The DX7 in many ways took over, because the DX7 did such an impressive Mark II that it changed the overall sound. So later versions of Rhodes and people's takes on it are often more based on a DX7 than the real thing. If I could play like Steely Dan, I would. Ooh, what's this gonna do? Okay, Okay, great big spring and some kind of compression that would never be done in the day. Okay. So it's meant for the bass. The whole lot of things in there. Probably good in the sense that they've given them some sort of order. I don't know that there's any sort of specific sounds which are based upon... Okay, so that's best of. So genre, best of. Okay. Yeah, they don't seem to have named anything, so it's not like we've got Steely Dan, Peg, or Midnight Cruiser or something in here, which is probably fine, because the reality is that most of that is more about playing style than it is about just, where the red knob was at that particular time. So there are a ton of presets here. Just go default again, which I'm not a fan of presets very much, but I guess they cover a certain amount of the range of sorts of things that people have done with this device and the things that are around it. Let's pop him aside at the moment. UAD, most people are familiar with. They're sort of like the new waves. I have a strange emotional relationship with UAD, Waves, all of these kinds of companies. The quality of what UAD is doing is good in terms of if we're speaking technically. Everything sounds good. What they're doing in terms of product marketing, placement, that kind of stuff, I have a big swinging question mark. But different people at different positions in their career are going to feel very differently. I think this sort of stuff was available when I was starting out in the mid-'80s. Probably I would have thought that it was just the most amazeball thing ever. Now I kind of feel like, I don't know. They keep giving me euro as price, their entry-level price. The full price is too small for me to read. I'll pop it up at 163 euro. This isn't cheap, but nor is it small. This is a huge download. If it gives you something that exclusively you can't get elsewhere, then fair enough, I guess. But there's also a whole lot of extra stuff. You've probably noticed in the pictures there's all this extra doohickey that's in the images. And it's important to understand that you're not just getting this bit, the bit that goes plinky plink. You're getting a lot of the elements that sit around it and have tended to define the technical aspect of the sound. But remember, as I said before, it wouldn't matter if we got the preset that Steely Dan used with Peg or Midnight Cruiser, that wouldn't automatically mean that translated to that level of coolth in your track, because those songs, the coolth, is all around how it's played by Becker Fagan or whoever they were getting to play their keys that moment in time. But you get the Leslie, and I just reviewed the waterfall. I'll pop the link up there. You've got some pedals and some studio-y type modules and various amps. Thank you. So they're part of the whole package, which help justify, to some extent, price, if that matters for you. And that's going to be very much a thing that I think we're going to have a split. Like for me, I'm kind of like, I want the thing that matters, which is the instrument, because I've got a whole pile of my own effects units, which I know and trust already. Other people are going to be like, that's amazeful. One thing that I will go into, but only as far as I could get, is that, yes, you have all these effects, and it's inevitable. You're going to think, can I put something else through them? I actually found on the back, here in Reason, ooh, look, audio in. Benedict got excited, so I flew another synth into it, and went nowhere. I couldn't work out how to get the sound out. Now, I did not RTFM, which is part of the process here. So maybe there's a way. Maybe they exist for some reason that nobody considered. Maybe they exist for sidechaining or something. But if they are an audio in, okay, that extends the value of these things in the sense that you can buy this one device and have access to all the other things as effects. But if it doesn't do that, it's okay, but it makes it a closed system to a great extent. All right, as I said, the Mark IIs in particular are pretty much a dime a dozen. Every door is likely to have a Mark II sound, a Rhodes sound, a suitcase sound, something which is a Mark II, basically. So I took the instrument, pulled it ready, it always turns on. It opens up for the first time in the dark, and then it turns the lights on. Clever. So I took it and pulled it right back to nothing. So I've turned off all processing or what have you, just set up a basic sound here. And here's one I played earlier. Nice little key off. There's a lot of sustain there. I don't know whether the real instrument sustains forever like that, but I assume it probably does because they say it does. There is a reverb because I've applied a send reverb to all of these, which I won't discuss. It's one of my own, but just for fairness sake. So we have this. Let's compare it to a fairly typical and nice, incredibly usable Mark II that comes within reasons thing. Most places will have something like this. UAD, reasons. They don't sound exactly the same because there is no exact sound of a Mark II. You get 14 of them, you've got 14 different Mark IIs, especially with their age. They're all going to be different. But this has been a little bit pre-treated, fair enough, but it's a very workable sound, and it's actually nicer. I've encountered some of these in cheaper doors, like I remember when I did the rather flawed Cakewalk review. Go find it; it's right at the bottom of the list. Like their Mark II was initially seemed okay, but in comparison was poor. So it's not like everyone that you get is good, but surprisingly, it's everywhere. Here's another one that I thought, okay, what am I going to get? This is back to the UAD. Let that ring out. Hello. I just reviewed this, just published this morning. This is Object. That's a physical modeling synth. And just for fun, I put some time into having a go at making something. No, it's not exactly the same, but in a mix, a lot of people probably couldn't tell the difference. Yes, this could have a much longer sustain, but this is kind of letting people know this is where I come from. Rather than using the sound, I will tend to find my own sound. Therefore, you have to decide where you sit on the I must have the sound, the sound, or whether you're like, I'm just going to find what I do and do what I do. Because while there was a certain amount of people grabbing these because they were so good at the time, and then of course the same thing with the DX7 versions of this kind of sound, all the permutations of how it ended up on record were far more in my sort of ballywick of going, yeah, I've got this instrument, but how do I make it sound like what I'm doing? And that's how you got all the extra stuff that went with it, and hence the sense that to be complete, UAD have said this should come with all these things that were commonly found around in various records. I will do my good and bad, then we will do the walk through. So my good and bad is, well, it sounds like a Mark II. Bearing in mind, as I said before, all Mark IIs sound like well, their own Mark II. None of them sound exactly the same. And what you do with them, how you record them, how you process them, how you mix them, how you play them, makes them incredibly broad. It's easy enough to say, oh, that'll be a Rhodes, they're right there, but you don't really know what they've done to it because there's so much. But this sounds like a Mark II. It's sounds fine. UAD, as I said, technically their quality is always fine. Technically, it's pretty hard to make something that's poor quality these days. Many people will see the extras, and particularly that sense that UAD give you, especially in all the marketing of it's all done for you, it's all prepared, it's all going to be the perfect sound. So you can tick your box and say, oh, I've got the right sound, it's going to make me hits just like all the other hits were made from these. Believe me, many Mark IIs were probably never on a hit anywhere, owned by bands that may have had the perfect Mark II and the perfect pedal board set up beside it, but couldn't play it in well enough to actually generate a hit, or just weren't lucky enough. So there's a lot of it's all done for you, which, as I said before, some people are going to see as being like, I put it on my bads as well. In terms of my bads, well, it's 8.4 gig. It's a massive download. Reason with its whole sound library, which includes a whole orchestra and drum loops and this, that, and the other, is I think 5.4, so it's enormous. I did notice that it could get a little heavy on CPU when lots of effects and stuff were turned on. I didn't get into that. It just did come up to 2 bars, which is not terrible on my modern i7, but it's just one of those things I noted. A bad is, I think that UAD and, well, I guess the customer base they're chasing are somewhat history obsessed. As in, you put a GUI on something that makes it look like it's 1975 or 1964 or whatever is in fashion this week, and people say and feel like it's good. Okay, fair enough. I guess that's a kind of a marketing thing. You know, you give people, you write gourmet or special artisanal on the same tomatoes that you pulled out of the same box for tomatoes. I'll put a higher price on and people will buy the more highly priced one. There's plenty of studies on that. I'm not just making that up. There is a whole kind of history obsession, which I feel like means that a lot of the focus encouraged in this stuff is not actually on what matters, which is the music, the story that I'm supposed to be telling, but on this kind of frou-frou around it, around, oh, you'll get history, you'll get the perfect sound that, oh, hits were made with this object, so that's somehow going to filter off onto you. As I've said several times, you could give me Eddie Van Halen's guitar, and it wouldn't matter how much I tapped it, I would still suck as badly as I would on a $2 guitar. And again, as I said, I put the all done for you into the negatives as well because I think it probably gets in the way. But for so many people, they think that that's what's going to get them there. I guess if it floats their boat, then maybe that's a good thing. For me, I think it does get in the way and it stops them actually finding how to make their own music because they become so obsessed with going, how do I get the exact perfect sound? Because that's going to get me there. It's not. How are you going to tell an amazing story? And whatever sound you use, you pull apart some of those old records. Like there's a classic album series where they dig into Asia, Steely Dan's Asia. This would have been all over it, and you hear some of the sounds, and you're like, there's another one with Bowie's Heroes, just really the song. I think it's Tony Visconti running through that, and some of the sounds are like Fripp's guitar play. It's like, oh my God, how awful does that sound? How terrible, nobody would do it. But in the final record, how amazing is that record because of the story? So don't let this kind of lots of pictures and this is the formula get in the way of what should matter, which is telling an amazing story. That's why those records work, not because of the presence of a Mark II, whether the real one or a software one, but because those bands were telling compelling stories. Alrighty, so Part 2, this is where we walk through the object itself, the actual device. Well, it has this huge GUI which you can make even bigger. Oh, and you can apply to everything. Nicely thought through, help and videos, documentation, which I didn't even open. So again, forgive me if I didn't get it, but that's part of my review process. If a software can't show at least most of its core functionality, then I think something's a little wrong. This doesn't do anything. We've got patches, which we saw here. Obviously, you can break them down into tags and what have you. You seem to be able to A/B, so if you've made a modification, then you can A/B to sort of go, oh, okay, what's what? Copy and paste. Okay, RTFM on that. You've got the ability to retune. You can set some different conditions for the instrument. So it'll obviously be less well claviered, well tempered, if it's worn. It does sound a little more perfect and harder in a sense, as new. Vintage obviously gives it that feel that we're used to. Worn starts to sound off. Definitely still usable, but a little off. Stretch, I don't know. I didn't get what the difference was. That's obviously an RTFM. You can change how sustain is managed, how noise velocity is handled, the noise of the sustain pedal. It's nice to have those sorts of things emulated. You can change velocity curve. Very relevant in this situation because how you play and want that to interface with the instrument is going to have a huge impact on the feel. So one difficulty for some players, which is fair enough with sample sets of these, is that they'll tend to have been set up with somebody else's velocity playing. So you can set up fairly complex curves of how the instrument's going to behave. I haven't seen anything about how this is created. I assume that it samples from its size, nor does it feel like physical modeling. You can set a noise floor. Yay, buzz. That's like the buzz you get from a particularly poorly wired Strat. So you can pull that in. You might go, why would I ever want to do that? It can really add a lot of charm to a recording. Performance stuff for mod wheels, dynamics, all of that kind of stuff. Overall output. We've got the keyboard screen. Obviously has a big picture of a keyboard. As such, some of it you can't interact with it, some of it you can. By clicking on it, it'll take you to the relevant section. Down the bottom, we have the overview controls, where we can turn on and off pedals. And kind of fairly instantly get into some fairly famous-ish sorts of sounds. I'm probably wrong, but I'm thinking Hill Street Blues. But definitely, just there, it's sort of like, oh, that's kind of similar to that. But that's a very dangerous way of writing songs. You've got the controls, which are just part of the instrument. There are other options later. Its overall level. Whether there's any kind of modeling in here, I'm not sure. Does it? Okay, so control click will send it back to default position. These kind of rather annoying controls that may be technically accurate, but yeah, wasted a lot of space here. Why not just give us a bass and treble? Because these things are a pain in the ass. Which one's which, buddy? Which one's which? I know in theory you tell me, and that the one on the outside's bass. And often these didn't run a lot of bass in practical mixes. But why make me think more than I need to? Just give me two knobs. You can still make them look like this, but to me that again, a history obsession is just like make better what we can make better in software. They put them into one knob on the hardware because it was going to cost money. It's not going to cost money to do it here. We've got vibrato, so speed and intensity. So intensity is the outside one. And we can turn that on and off. And that is a performance type function. It's not used generally quite the same, or at least to my knowledge, as the Leslie type effect, switching in and out in the middle of lines with the Rhodes, but no doubt people did do it. Otherwise, you could set something to this, which is probably what your mod wheel is. My mod wheel's not doing anything, which doesn't mean anything because I haven't set anything up. The sustain pedal doesn't actually do anything, which to me feels like, well, if you've done all this stuff, why don't you just allow me to click the darn thing? I know you're working on the assumption that I should have a sustained foot pedal, and maybe in theory I should, but what would I do with the stupid thing? Let me press the button. You've then got these extra things, which are like your pedals over here, the mod option, the delay option, and the reverb option. I'm getting some distortion, but it probably sounds nice out in the real world. That's your front. It's an overview kind of setup. We've then got the next screen, which are pedals, which I've said you can also access through here. We press our pedals, or we can go back to here. Pedals, you've got different slots. So the wah slot, the phaser slot, and the compressor slot. So you can have nothing there. The Filtron. Now, my argument against these is that they're sometimes rather limited. They might sound great, but sometimes it feels like they're kind of one-trick ponies, like you can get them in the one setting where they do something useful, otherwise they just kind of seem to do nothing much useful at all. Okay, you've probably got to get to learn them, but I remember this being much happier as I started to move into more modern, particularly into digital devices and VST that were well thought through, that you've got a far greater range of usability, that these kinds of things often feel like they're so incredibly limited. So why obsess over them? But you've got a Filtron or a wah. You can set that one to manual. I'm not quite sure whether we can set that to something. Obviously, it would be nice if you could set it to an expression pedal. I would assume that you could. I see, so sensitivity being to level, so how much is going to open the filter, how hard I play. I tend to be a very light player. Alrighty, so phaser. Okay, we've actually got more options than just a phaser, so okay, it changes with whatever is put in here. So then you seem to be able to pick and choose from all of these things. And in theory, there should be plenty to be found in terms of cool sounds. Obviously, if you are obsessed with trying to pretend that you're in 1973 and then go and make the rest of the mix sound like you're in 2020, why? Then these probably will amuse you greatly. So there's a chorus, which can operate obviously as a vibrato or chorus. On or off. And again, these are all modeled accurately in terms of how they look, despite the fact that it makes them, well, not consistent. But it is a nice sounding chorus as such, so nothing against it. This compressor, which why would you do this? I mean, why? I know people are going to go, it's authentic. And I'm like, it's authentically horrid and useless. It's like it just doesn't behave in a way that's particularly practical or sensible in modern day. So I could see myself effectively never using it. The flanger we looked at before. Phaser. Again, it's kind of like, oh, well, yes, no doubt this is the sound. Looks like it's probably trying to be a small stone, but they probably knew they'd get in trouble if they typed something rocky on it. But again, I feel like, why not just use all the options you've got in software to make a phaser which is far more able to do all kinds of amazing things. Comparing that to the shifter phaser that comes in Reason 12, I'd just be like, that leaves this for dead in terms of what I can do with it. If I'm obsessed with sounding like the Orange Pedal, I just need to listen to the Orange Pedal and go, okay, and then work that out on something else. So it's just, okay, it's that kind of thinking that does me in, but other people are going to be like, best thing ever. So a spring in a pedal. I don't know whether such a thing existed. Maybe it did. Does it sound like a spring? That sounds quite cool. I like it. And then tape echo. I don't know whether a tape echo in a pedal existed at the time. Maybe there's a switch. Oh, yes, there is. Phew. And again, no. Yeah, but this is nice. Don't get me wrong, it's nice, but unless there's something pre-built in, I can't actually choose modulation for that, because I'm obsessed with modulating my delays. And then the third slot, which is chorus, compressor, flanger, spring, reverb, tape. So it's the same thing. So what happens if I try to put tape echo in here and you can't use it twice. No multi-tapping. Curse you. No, not compressor. Compressor's silly. So chorus into tape echo. That's the kind of stuff that I find interesting, the ability to create something that's like, okay, that's going to be different. It just doesn't sound like I'm trying to be Steely Dan, which everybody obviously thinks I'm trying to do with my quality of playing. So that's your pedals, and again, you can access. Oh, look, it even changed the picture. That for authenticity, full marks for novelty. That when I change things in my pedal board, they change out here. But it does limit me to only 3 effects. Maybe that's all that was allowed. Maybe the 70s just phoned and said you can't have more than 3 effects. There's then your amplifier stuff, and we can choose different amps. We can use this. Oh, let's turn my impressively heavy-handed effects off. So you lose the controls of the keyboard, and it becomes the controls for the amplifier that you've chosen. You can choose mics. which screams to me that this is all going to be impulse response, convolution. If that pleases you, great. So basic positioning, but only really preset positioning. You can't sort of drag this out and say, what happens if I put it over there or behind me or halfway to Saturn? And you can change the speaker. That perhaps is the equivalent of moving the mic back. We pull in more room sound, which does add a nice warm thing. You've got level there, and then we've got the controls on the front of the amp, which I'm not going to go through heavily because these are amp-specific kind of things. Bear in mind that guitar amps, and that goes for any of these sorts of things, anything that's built like a guitar amp, will not behave quite the same as your typical modern VST type thing or your home amplifier. They are different. The technology is different for different purposes. So you can find they just behave in their own special sort of ways. It's a thing to get used to. So that's using the onboard reverb of that device, and it also seems to have okay. How come I've got so that's annoying. It replaces my actual keyboard, my piano's controls with the amplifier that I've said I'm running. And then offers me a tremolo. Now, I have no real argument with both being offered, but it seems poor thinking that I have to go to here now. Both are going at once, which is fine. I'm all for being able to do both at once, but the fact that I lose my control to be able to easily access them, because if we're obsessing so much about the real world, then why exactly is it that suddenly I can't access things that I would be able to access if we were in the real world? Like I'm sitting here with my Mark II in front of me with my real knob, and then I can lean over and fiddle with my real knob there. So that's poor thinking, boys and girls. It really is. So that's one amplifier, sort of Tweed or Sidekick or whatever it is. The main big one, which we can single or dual mic, again with a couple of different types of mics, but they are matched mics apparently. We don't seem to be able to choose different mics. That goes into stereo. Room again must be distance. Oh, that's interesting. That's going back to giving me this control. I guess because that amp really doesn't have any controls on the front, it's just sort of a slave. It's a power for what's happening here, I assume. At least that's the way it seems to be working here. Nice enough, sounds okay. We don't have the ability to recone those. We can't pull them out and put Celestians or whatever's in them. Or run down our local Tandy. DI box, as we've seen, that's just the pure piano sound. And then this is, by all intents and purposes, the waterfall, which is the Leslie. So it seems to have essentially the same functionality as that. Again, boys and girls, if we're being so pedantic about everything looking real, you did not put your Leslie cabinet backwards to the audience. It looks nice from the outside, this nice wooden box, and here they've presented it to us ugly side out, which believe me, they didn't do, because you had enough respect for your audience to say that they don't want to look at this, let alone spend their time throwing beer bottles into it. But nonetheless, you've got the power amp and its drive. And let's go back to here and get rid of this. So that the speaker's in brake mode, as in it's off. That's all useless. And of course we can push it into drive. If we went back to here and turned our level up, again, see, I had to go backwards and forwards to sort of access some things. And then you can put it into interesting. There was a stereo width option on this one, but not on this, which is all about stereo. And then we can put it into fast mode. So if you can only afford one keyboard player, or one keyboard player but doesn't have the ability to afford a B3 along with his Mark II, then the audience will barely know or care that that is actually a Rhodes rather than a B3. They're just going to go, oh, organ. So you can set up various options just the same. Though it seems to be literally that waterfall unit that's in here. But again, I couldn't find out, despite it seeming to have audio ins, I couldn't find out how to access that externally, meaning that they hope you like this enough and then have to go out and buy the same thing that you already own. That's how it all comes together. You've then got these studio effects, which again are existing UAD things, and kind of double up a little bit. You've got this modulation device, the delay and reverb. These you don't seem to be able to option out or whatever, but the first two you've got the option to swap them, complete with animation. So you can have your compression, which I guess is some sort of 1176-y type thing. Again, if we're obsessed with vintage, why are we having a mix knob on our 1176? There's no such thing. Nobody did it. But some presets, and then you can switch it off. There. Okay. I don't know whether I'd be doing it so much here, but if the player is looking for a particular type of sound, actually let's just get out of this one. Something sounds really... oh, it's that. I think. Something sounds a little distorty. Again, probably not a biggie in speakers. Definitely, maybe it's got some kind of makeup. It does seem to want to get loud. Actually, that may be a bit loud. In which case, some of the drive may have been coming from my mastery stuff. Yeah, it's got some kind of auto makeup or something. It tends to actually get louder. I'm not a massive fan of that approach. You've got this EQ. Pull out some bottom end, warm it off. Change our overall level. Again, just really inconsistent sort of switching. And why do I need a switch here that seems to work with this? It's like, don't waste my time with these things. They're okay. I mean, they're pretty and everything. Then you've got this. We've got a chorus option to put in here. And then one over here. Flashes, which is wonderful. Okay, so that's obviously depth. And that's rate. And then mix. Okay, there's a little lock button. I'm not sure what that means. So we can have it as chorus, flanger, not big on slower rates, but I guess you mostly use faster with an electric piano. Oh wow, and Flutter locks too. So that's just like, well, lo-fi. That's very modern. You can put that into mono, and that's a good thing, because I gotta say, as a mix engineer, being sent this level of effects all over a sound already, especially in stereo, can just be a screaming nightmare, because, well, you can't get rid of it, and they've gotten so obsessed with so much stereo, especially on a line that probably sits inside a mix, you will have to collapse it, or sometimes send back and say, please do as asked and turn off all the effects. You know, there's all this kind of stuff. If it's poorly considered, or more like because it can just make it really hard to make something sit in the mix. And even sometimes just the fact that they've decided they want their rates like this sounds really nice on its own. But then when you get the whole mix is moving at a different rate than this, and that does not mean that you should simply sync to BPM. But the effect is here, and nice enough, and the ability to double dip, I guess. So there's good versatility within the confines of their obsession with history. There's then another delay. Let's turn this guy off. Have to find the power button in every case. Sometimes it's here, sometimes it's there. It's like power there. Different flavors. Yeah, whatever. Okay, so it's an onboard effect, and so it's not got the space to be as versatile as, you know, the Echo, the classic Space Echo, but and I guess that's okay. It's leaving those things. It does have the ability to send this to the reverb separately from the main amount. I tend to just send everything anyway, but it's an interesting thing which some people will like. You can change your tone and syncing or proper by hand. Oh, that's that chorus there. Let's go old. I mean, it's nice. Again, I would just be like, there's no modulation. It's like I just wouldn't use it because I'd break out and use something else. But from a musician's point of view, I can understand, like a player's point of view who's not mixing, I can understand them saying, look, I'll just do all this. This gives me the setup that I need, and then I can flick through my patches on stage, assuming this is going to be robust enough for stage. Should be. And then we've got this reverb. Pre-delay, decay. Okay, seems to remember some settings in some places. Maybe a plate doesn't have a pre-delay. It's obsessed with getting rid of pre-delay on some things and sending things back in others. I wonder again if these are algorithms or IRs. I'm going to defer probably to IRs because I get the IR feel over a lot of things in here. Some people will think that's great. I'm not much of a fan, but again, at this level, it's probably okay. But my feeling on this is that, especially if we're looking to make it sound and feel like 1973, then IRs are probably the stupidest thing we can do, because IRs are such a 2010 thing, or whatever date they started really just being used by people, and therefore don't feel the same. An algorithm moves. An analog thing, an analog echo, an analog reverb is an algorithm. And so it moves with whatever is happening. Whereas for me, at least, while IRs sound impressive initially, they always feel like, well, I always say they're bunnies on an Instaham photo. The ears aren't really there, and they feel like they're always that little bit delaminated, whereas an algorithm, even though it may not be as technically perfect, it moves with everything that's happening inside your sound. But that's okay. If we put our delay back in, let's just... so we can have... well, that seems to be going to the echo. I see, so you can separate out so that our taps are not actually going to our... or we can send them over. Generally, I tend to send everything over, because why would you want to separate them out? It sounds weird. It's not the way the real world works. But there is that versatility there, so let's put... fabulous. Let's maybe de-escalate some of that. So again, sound-wise, it sounds, well, like a Mark II. I don't recall whether I've ever played one or not. I would poke one if I had the opportunity to. I'm sure I would. I just can't remember. They're one of those things that sort of used to be everywhere, and then suddenly DX7s were everywhere because they were so much easier to deal with, and they were brighter. They made it through the mix a lot easier. This, depending upon how you look at it, is either going to be like, wow, how amazing, I've got this whole package of, like the equivalent of, I plug my guitar in and I get everything that makes me sound like Eddie Van Halen or Malmsteen or Pantera or Dimebag Darrell from Pantera or whatever at the flick of a preset. This is a lot like that. And having the usual suspects in here is potentially seen as a real positive. I'm more of the, yeah, look, I just want the sound, or my approximation of the sound, and then I'm going to build it up the way I want. But I'm a reason man, so I would get my electric piano here. I would be grabbing my thing here and going, okay. Little too heavy-handed. Oh, it's because it's fuzz. I missed. finding whatever sound I want. I mean, that's probably a little heavier than I wanted. Okay, let's say that's what I wanted. Sweeper. Not pretending this is going to be a great sound, but just showing how once you know what you're doing, let's put a little bit of drive on this. That's what I'm used to doing, so I'm a little bit kind of like, this is such a limited way of doing it. But you note that my sound is really unique, and it's not designed to be anything, so it's pointless to. So if you're going to say, but it doesn't sound like a Mark II, that's like you're missing the point. Unique means it doesn't sound like everybody else's or so-and-so's hit. It's not Peg, because I'm not Steely Dan. But the results that I get will be my thing. And I'm delighted with that. I don't want to sound like Steely Dan. Well, part of me was like, gee, I wish I could be Steely Dan. I know that Benedict is Benedict, and so Benedict's sound has to come out. This would concern me in the sense that while I can get variety, as you've seen, that the whole obsession seems to be about narrowing. So that's the two sides. Is it good? Yeah, it's good quality. There are some annoyances with GUI, like particularly the thing that when we're running an amp, like one of these, that I lose access to my front panel. Stupid things like, well, we're so fussy about the way everything looks, and then this is expletive deleted backwards. What's wrong with the front of the cabinet? But I can get their argument in the sense that when you're here, and you would actually be seeing the back of the cabinet, then it messes up their funky little paradigm. And of course, the thing here. All right. There is an option to do it, but they've kind of grayed it out. You still have to go somewhere else to do it. So I'm still going to ping you for the fact that you've been more interested in your great big stupid waste of space and beautiful flowing lines than you have in practicality. Okay, so from here I can get both at once. I don't have to turn off one of these to access the other. Better focus my MIDI, I think. But it's just cumbersome, where there could have been far more practical ways of doing it. But it obviously wouldn't have had as much frou-frou, which I just can't help but feel that this frou-frou is what's really being sold, what people are really buying, and then, of course, wondering why they're struggling to do the music, because they think they've bought the music, when in reality they've bought a picture, an illusion, a delusion. So, two sides. Is it good? Yes, it is. Does it emulate that instrument and the effects around it well? Well, I'm not A-Bing, but I'm going to say yes, it does. Is it versatile? Yes and no, because yes, you've got the ability to swap things and what have you, and go, oh no, that's no good. I'm going to put in the instead. But a lot of these are far more limited than they need to be. You know, compare just the phaser that I put in, and I spent no time showing it to you, but that's capable of so much more than one of these pedals. So in terms of versatility, yes, within the small box that they have allowed. And of course, unless I'm missing something and it's sure not obvious, then while there seem to be audio ins on this, you can't actually access any of this, your pedals or whatever, to do double duty with the thing that you just paid for. I think that well, what I see from their marketing perspective, and in that they want us to go, oh, that's really good, that's so useful, I wish I could put that on my synthesizer or whatever. Oh, I better go buy that now, or sub to get all of these things. I just think, well, if we've bought them, we've bought working versions of these that are effects units, why not let us plug into them? It's there. So not doing it in a digital environment where everything could be plugged into everything else and fed back into everything else and turned upside down and turned purple, why not do it? It seems like a kind of a meanness of spirit. That's unfortunately what undoes me with Waves, UAD, pretty well all these companies that are trying to be everything to everybody, trying to be kind of like the target of the DAW world, whilst of course pitching themselves as being the pinnacle of everythingness. Is that they're really the pinnacle only of self-marketing, and the music comes second. No matter how perfect the quality may be, the music comes second because its usability is, well, usability is what makes music, not this stuff. Obviously, you're going to have your own opinion, and if you are okay with the pricing and you are okay with the UAD models of buying or renting things, and you like this kind of approach, then sit down and spend some time with it. If you are a lot more seasoned and a lot more capable as a sound designer, mix engineer, what have you, you may find, like me, that you just go, oh, there's a lot of frou-frou and a lot of limits. Or you may well go, oh, there's all these things. That's sort of between you and your God. As I said earlier on, if I'd had access to this in 1988, then I probably would have thought very differently about it than I do now, because it would have seemed like the box of the most coolest things ever. Would I have been able to make better music? No! My music would have been just as poor with this as it would without it. So you've got to kind of make your own decision on this one for sure. Is it good? Within its confines, yes, it's very good. Would I buy it? Unfortunately, no, because there's a whole other thing going on from what I want. I would again be back with this kind of thing, no matter how not perfect it sounds, because I make it perfect for me. But this gives you Mark II in a studio anywhere from about 73 to 83 with a big bow on it, and that's what many people want. Alrighty. If you have any questions, not about UAD or their support, please, we are not that, but about the content of this video up to this point here, please don't ask me questions from like something I said 5 minutes ago, because it just means you didn't watch the video. Then subscribe, pop them on down below. We do like to see engagement. We don't get as much as we like, but then that's the case everywhere on the internet these days. Sadly, nobody engages. Everybody's thinking that the world's about being given stuff. It's when you engage and work with others you get a level of cool. Remember Becker and Fagan, Steely Dan? A lot of what's on their records was played by other people. And people were like, but that's not how Bob Dylan does it. But Bob Dylan did do it that way. He had a band called The Band, and they added a lot of, well, what made Bob Dylan Bob Dylan. So Becker and Fagan used whoever was around, whoever was going to be able to provide the best part at the moment. Even Pink Floyd did that. You know, they couldn't nail a vocal, so they wandered next door and picked up, what's his name, from another band to nail that part. I know Roger Waters is all bent out of shape about it now. I could have done that. Okay, in hindsight, of course you could. In hindsight, I could do that, because what's his name laid that out. Actually, I couldn't because I can't sing anywhere near as well as what's his name. But this mindset back then was the song's what matters. We've got to grab whatever it's going to get it done. And that synergy of even having people who kind of hated each other, like Dave and Roger in Pink Floyd, created those amazing records that we are not equaling today because everybody's like, so, oh no, but I'm just waiting for everything to be given to me and I don't need to work with other people because I'm so amazeballs. Okay, if you're that amazeballs, why is your song not doing well? Why are you not out there being booked? Because nobody knows you exist and you don't play with others. I know nobody wants to hear that, but that's the stuff you got to do. Engage, and that means getting out there, talking, creating relationships. You might talk to somebody in the thread down there, whether that be me or some random off the internet, and go, "Ooh, I like the cut of your jib, sir. Have you considered doing a thing? I can actually play that Mark II thing and sound pretty good." And next thing you know, you're doing a thing. Just before I started this, I was talking to Sean Johnson, a EWI player. Well, he doesn't like them always called EWI because that's actually a brand name, but an electronic flute tootin' thing. So it's like a MIDI player for MIDI. So he plays horn only using synth sounds. And it was through conversation and circumstance, and I'm working on something, and I thought, well, this is going long, and it needs another voice in here. So I was like, Sean, do you want to do that? Yeah, mate, send it on over. I send it on over. A couple of days later, it comes back, and it's like, oh, that's not what I expected at all. But you know what? It's cool. It added another voice. Actually added some other listeners to my stuff as well. This is what we're going to be doing. So grab this, have a play with it, see what you think. If you are concerned like me that it's going to limit you, don't get caught up in the, oh, but it sounds more pro, this is what I need. It's not going to make you pro. Move on. If you know that you can't really work out how to do those things and you're not going to bring in a sound designer to do them for you, then this could be a great box for you. But just remember that having a Mark II, no matter how realistic it sounds, isn't going to make you hits. It's what you do with it that's going to make you have people be interested. Okay, go out there, have fun, have a great day.